Everybody wants to be blessed. And why shouldn't we? I definitely want to be blessed because in the scriptures, by definition, to be blessed simply means to be happy, to be content, to be completely satisfied with life. We all want that. So the real question is, what is it that truly makes us happy? What is it that truly makes us content? What is it that gives us true and lasting satisfaction in life? Most people immediately associate those things with physical circumstances, our health, our career, our finances. So if things are going well with our kids, we say we're blessed. If things are going well at work, we say we're blessed. But the Bible tells a much different story. For example, in the ESV translation in the New Testament, there are 112 times where the word blessed or blessing or bless occurs, and not one of them has anything to do with any kind of material prosperity or any kind of good circumstances. And that's because when the Lord talks about blessing His people, He's talking about something much deeper and much more permanent than that. In today's reading from Psalms 30 to 32, we see very clearly what God means when He's talking about the source of true blessedness. Psalm 30, David's praising the Lord for bringing him out of a period of trials and great difficulty. And he says clearly that he knows it was the Lord who brought on those trials. And he tells us why in verse 6. There was a time when David was going through great prosperity, when things were going well for him, and he got proud, and he got very comfortable. He said, I will not be moved. In other words, I'm on top of the world. I've got things under control. And the Lord removed his comfort from him in order to get his attention. David repented, and then he experienced the true joy and the true blessing of being forgiven. He rejoices in verse 5 that the Lord only stays angry for a moment, but He pours out His grace for a lifetime. And because David's right with God, he says in verse 10, my mourning has been turned to dancing. Psalm 31, David's crying out to the Lord to rescue him from current difficulties, from the many enemies who are surrounding him. And he puts his hope not in the power of God to fix his circumstances, but in the mercy and the unfailing love of God to make him right with Him. Verse 7, he says, I will rejoice in your loving kindness. Verse 16, he says, save me in your loving kindness. Verse 21, he says, in the midst of my enemies, in the midst of my suffering, you have already shown your loving kindness to be great. Then he begins Psalm 32 with a declaration that sums up the blessedness of the two previous Psalms. He says, how blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sin is covered. How blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them. He talks of a time when he was living in sin and he was trying to hide it from the Lord. But he says, the hand of the Lord was heavy on me and I couldn't take it any longer. So in verse 5 he says, I acknowledged my sin and the Lord forgave me. And David discovered something that he's now testifying of to us, and that's this, that in the place of forgiveness, there's security. The enemy can't have you there. In the place of forgiveness, the Lord promises, in verse 8, He will guide you. He will walk closely with you. In the place of forgiveness, He promises in verse 10, the loving kindness of the Lord, the unfailing love of God will surround you. We think of so many other things when we think about being blessed. But the true blessing of the child of God is that they're in right relationship with Almighty God, that God Himself walks closely with them, that His unfailing love surrounds them. As I record this morning, it's exactly 32 years to the day when the grace of God found me, and Jesus Christ walked into my life and made me a new man. And it's as true now as it was then. How blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sin is covered. How blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them.